So, here's something worth thinking about as you settle in tonight. Right now, while you lie here in the dark, there is a small gold record moving through space. It is farther from home than anything human hands have ever made. It left this planet before a great many people alive today were born. And it is still going, quietly, without any help from us, carrying the sound of a human heartbeat that beats a little like yours. Nobody is steering it anymore. Nobody needs to. It is simply falling through the emptiness between the stars, the way a stone falls, except there is nothing out there to stop it. On its surface, cut into grooves finer than a hair, there is music. There are voices. There is the sound of rain, and of a kiss, and of a mother speaking to a child. There is, if you can believe it, 1 full minute of a young woman's brainwaves recorded 2 days after she fell in love. You are made of the same atoms as the people who put it there. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, all of it was forged in stars that died long before the Earth existed. So in a real sense, the thing drifting out there is not entirely a stranger to you. It is a message from your own kind, sent out into the dark on the off chance that someone, someday, might be listening. Tonight we are going to follow that record, where it came from, what is actually on it, the people who stayed up through the night to build it, against a deadline that should have been impossible, and the quieter question underneath all of it, the one they only half admitted to themselves at the time. Who was this message really for? If you drift off somewhere along the way, that is perfectly fine. The record is not going anywhere. Neither are the stars. The story will still be here whenever you come back to it. And honestly, drifting off is rather the point. You do not need to hold on to a single fact. You only need to let the voice carry you. So let's start where the story actually starts. Not with the record, and not even with the spacecraft that carries it. Let's start with something much older than either. Let's start with the very old human habit of leaving a message behind. People have always done this. Long before anyone understood what a star was, we were pressing our hands into cave walls and leaving the print behind in ochre. We were carving names into stone. We were burying the dead with their tools and their beads, as if to say to some future finder, here was a person, and this person mattered. It is one of the oldest things we do. We make a mark, and we hope the mark outlasts us. For most of history, the finder we imagined was another human being, a descendant, a stranger walking the same land 1,000 years later. We left messages for people we would never meet, but people we could at least picture. They would have hands like ours. They would have eyes. They would read the way we read, or something close to it. And then, in the middle of the 20th century, something shifted. For the first time, we had machines that could leave the Earth entirely. We had rockets. We had probes that could sail past the planets and keep going. And a small number of people began to ask a strange new question. If we can send an object beyond the sun, into the space between the stars, then who might find it out there? Not a descendant, not a stranger on the same land, something else entirely. This was not a comfortable question, and most serious scientists kept it at arm's length. It sounded like science fiction, but a few of them took it seriously, and one of them, more than anyone, made it his life's work. His name was Carl Sagan. You may know the name. He became famous later on television, with a soft voice and a way of saying the word billions that people still imitate. But in the early 1970s, he was mostly a working astronomer, teaching at Cornell University in upstate New York. thinking hard about the possibility of life beyond the Earth. He was not embarrassed by that question the way his colleagues were. He thought it was the most interesting question there was, and he was not working alone. There was another astronomer, a quieter man named Frank Drake, who had been thinking along the same lines for even longer. Back in 1960, Drake had done something almost nobody had dared to do. He pointed a radio telescope at two nearby stars and listened, just listened, for any signal that might be artificial. He heard nothing that first time, but he had opened a door and he could not really close it again. Drake is also the man who wrote down a famous equation, a kind of back-of-the-envelope way to estimate how many communicating civilizations might exist in our galaxy. You take the rate at which stars form, you multiply by the fraction that have planets, and the fraction of those planets that could support life, and so on down the line, until you arrive at a number. The honest truth is that most of those fractions were, and still are, unknown. But the equation did something important anyway. It turned a daydream into a set of questions you could actually study. It made the search respectable. So by the early 1970s, you had these two men, Sagan and Drake. Both were convinced that the question of other minds in the universe was a real scientific question, and both were aware that humanity was about to start throwing objects out of the solar system. It was only a matter of time before someone connected those two facts. What if one of those objects carried a message? Not a radio signal, which fades and scatters, but a physical thing, an object you could hold, sailing out into the dark with something of us written on it. The first chance to try came sooner than they expected, and it came in a very modest form. In the early 1970s, NASA was preparing to launch two probes called Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11. These were small spacecraft built to fly past Jupiter and Saturn and send back the first close photographs of those giant worlds. And once they had finished that job, their paths would carry them out of the solar system forever. They would become, in time, some of the first human objects to leave the sun behind. Carl Sagan realized something about that. These probes were going to drift through the galaxy for a very, very long time. Longer than the pyramids have stood. Longer, possibly, than the Earth itself will last. And they were going to carry nothing at all that said where they came from or who had built them. They would be blank. It seemed like a waste. Here was a bottle about to be thrown into the largest ocean there is, and no one had thought to put a note inside. So Sagan, together with Frank Drake, sketched out a message. It had to be simple, because it had to survive being found by a mind that shared nothing with us. No common language, no shared history, possibly no shared biology at all. They settled on a small metal plaque, gold-plated so it would not corrode, to be bolted to the frame of each Pioneer probe. The drawing on the plaque was made by an artist named Linda Salzman Sagan, who was Carl's wife at the time. It showed a man and a woman, drawn as simple line figures, standing in front of an outline of the spacecraft so that a finder could judge our size. The man's hand was raised in a gesture that was meant to read as peaceful, though of course there is no guarantee a stranger would read it that way at all. Around the two figures were the real instructions, and these were written in the only language Sagan and Drake trusted, the language of physics. There was a diagram of a hydrogen atom, the most common thing in the universe, flipping between two states, which gives you a natural unit of time and a natural unit of length that any physicist anywhere would recognize. There was a map, a sunburst of lines showing the position of our sun relative to 14 pulsars. We will come back to pulsars because they matter enormously to this whole story. For now, Just know that this little map was a set of directions. It said, in effect, here is where we live. The Pioneer plaque went up in 1972 and again in 1973, and it caused a small stir back on Earth, not because of the physics, because of the two naked human figures. Some people wrote angry letters. They were sending pornography into space, apparently, on the taxpayers' dime. It seems almost quaint now that anyone had the energy to be scandalized by a line drawing headed for the stars. But it mattered later, as you will see, because NASA remembered the complaints. Then, in 1974, Frank Drake tried something even bolder. There is a giant radio telescope in Puerto Rico, at a place called Arecibo, built into a natural bowl in the hills. It had just been upgraded, and to mark the occasion, Drake composed a message and beamed it out into space at the stars of a distant cluster. It was not a physical object this time. It was a burst of radio waves, a picture made of on and off pulses, a little over 1,600 of them. Arranged the right way, those pulses drew a crude image. The numbers 1 through 10, the chemical building blocks of life, a strand of DNA, a stick figure of a human being, the solar system, with the third planet nudged up toward the little figure, to say, this one, this is where we are. The Arecibo message was aimed at a cluster of stars so far away that any reply, even at the speed of light, would take about 50,000 years to arrive. So it was, everyone understood, more of a demonstration than a real attempt at conversation. A proof that we could do it. A way of saying to ourselves, here is what a message from Earth might look like. So by the middle of the 1970s, the groundwork was laid. Sagan and Drake had learned how to speak in the language of science. They had learned to lean on the hydrogen atom and the pulsars and the simple truths of mathematics, because those were the only things a stranger might share. They had a plaque flying on the Pioneers and a radio message racing toward a distant cluster. And they had, quietly, become the two people on Earth most experienced at the odd art of talking to no one in particular, across distances that made the word far sound almost silly. And then, a much bigger opportunity arrived. NASA was about to launch something far more ambitious than the Pioneers. And this time, there would be room for far more than a plaque. The mission was called Voyager, and it existed because of a lucky accident of the heavens. Every so often, the outer planets line up in their orbits in a rare and useful way. We are talking about once in roughly 175 years. When it happens, a single spacecraft can swing from one planet to the next, using the gravity of each to fling itself onward to the following one. Jupiter to Saturn to Uranus to Neptune, all in one grand tour, riding gravity like a series of slingshots. Miss that alignment, and you would have to wait more than a century for another chance. The late 1970s was the window. It would not come again in any of our lifetimes. So NASA built two probes to seize it, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. They were not large. Each was about the size of a small car, if you ignore the long booms and the big dish antenna. They carried cameras and instruments to study the planets, and a plutonium power source to keep them running for decades in the cold and the dark, where sunlight is too weak to be much use. There is a small confusion in the names that is worth clearing up, because it trips people up forever. Voyager 2 actually launched first, on the 20th of August, 1977. Voyager 1 launched a couple of weeks later, on the 5th of September. But Voyager 1 was put on a faster, shorter path, and it soon overtook its twin, so the numbering follows the speed, not the launch date. Voyager 1 is the leader. It always has been. It just left second. Somewhere in the planning of all this, the idea returned. If these two probes were going to leave the solar system, the way the pioneers had, then surely they too should carry a message. And this time, the man to design it was obvious. NASA turned to Carl Sagan. Sagan said yes, of course, but he did not have much time, and he did not have much money. The whole project was given a budget of about $18,000. For a message meant to represent the entire human species to the cosmos for the rest of time, that is a strikingly small sum. It is the kind of budget you might give a modest wedding. And the deadline was worse than the budget. The launches were fixed by the movement of the planets, which does not negotiate. The team had a matter of months to decide what humanity would say, and to actually build the thing that would say it. So Sagan gathered a small group of people around him, and this group is really the heart of the story. Because a message like this is not made by a committee reading reports. It is made by a few tired, opinionated, deeply human people, arguing in a room, running out of time, and making choices that will outlast every one of them by 1 billion years. There was Frank Drake, again, handling the hard technical questions. How do you physically store a message so it survives space? How do you tell a stranger to play it? There was Druyan, a young writer, who took charge of the creative direction and, as it happens, ended up woven into the record in a way no one planned. There was Ferris, a science writer and music journalist, who produced the record and took the lead on choosing the music. There was Jon Lomberg, an artist, who led the search for images. And Salzman Sagan, who had drawn the pioneer figures, took on the spoken greetings. That was more or less the core of it. A handful of people. They pulled in help from musicologists and folklorists and language departments. But the decisions, in the end, came down to this small group, working at a pace that sounds insane when you say it out loud. They were choosing the music of a planet, and the images of a planet, and the voices of a planet in the time it takes most of us to plan a summer holiday. And before they could choose any of it, they had to solve a problem that has no clean solution. How do you talk to someone you cannot imagine? Think about what that really means. Every message you have ever sent in your life was aimed at another human. Even a message to a stranger assumes an enormous amount. It assumes they have eyes. It assumes they read left to right, or right to left, but in lines. It assumes they know what a letter is, what a word is, what a picture is. It assumes they have a childhood behind them full of the same basic experiences, sunlight and faces, and the sound of speech. Take all of that away, and you are left with almost nothing to build on. The team could not assume the finder had eyes. They could not assume it had ears. They could not assume it lived in time the way we do, or thought in anything like language, or had ever seen a face. They could not even assume it was one creature rather than many, or a machine rather than a body. Every comfortable assumption you would normally lean on, they had to knock away. So what is left when you take all of that away? What could you possibly share with a mind that alien? And the answer they arrived at is, in its own way, rather beautiful. What you share is the universe itself. The same physics runs everywhere. A hydrogen atom here behaves exactly like a hydrogen atom on the far side of the galaxy. The same numbers count the same things. 1 is 1, everywhere. A circle is a circle. The speed of light is the speed of light. If there is any common ground at all between us and a mind out there, it is not language or culture or biology. It is the plain machinery of the cosmos, which we both, presumably, live inside. So that became the foundation. Wherever the message had to explain itself, it would explain itself in the language of science. And on top of that foundation, They would then pile everything that is not science: the music, the laughter, the whale song, the love. Because science can tell a stranger where we are and how to work the machine, but it cannot tell them what it feels like to be us. And that second thing, the team decided, was the part actually worth sending. Now they had to choose a form. And this is where the decision gets a little strange to modern ears. They chose a phonograph record, a vinyl-style record, the kind you might picture spinning on a turntable, except this one would be cut into copper and plated in gold. Why a record? In the 1970s, this was not an obviously odd choice, but even then there were other options. The reasoning was partly practical. A grooved record is about as simple a storage method as there is. The information is physically there, cut into the surface, readable by anyone who can drag a needle along a groove and measure how it wiggles. There is no code to crack, no electronics to power, no format that could become obsolete. A record is almost embarrassingly direct. The sound is right there in the shape of the groove. You could, in principle, read it with a very steady hand and a very good microscope. And gold matters too. Space is not entirely empty. There is a thin drift of dust and stray atoms and radiation out there, and over millions of years, even that thin drift wears things down. Gold resists that. Gold does not tarnish, does not rust, does not react with much of anything. A gold-plated record, sealed in an aluminum case, sitting in the deep cold of interstellar space, should stay readable for an extraordinarily long time. The team's own estimate was on the order of 1 billion years. Say that again slowly. 1 billion years. That is longer than complex life has existed on Earth. The record will very likely still be playable long after our species, and possibly our planet, are gone. So the plan took shape. A gold record, holding sounds and images, sealed in a protective case, bolted to each of the 2 Voyager probes as they left for the outer planets, and beyond them, the stars. 12 inches across. 2 sides. And onto those 2 sides, the team had to fit a portrait of an entire world. But before they could put anything at all onto the record, they had to answer the first and hardest practical question. How does a stranger who has never seen a record, and may never have seen anything, figure out that this gold disc is meant to be played at all? And how do they figure out how? That problem landed on Frank Drake, and the answer he came up with is etched right onto the cover. The cover of the Golden Record is a plate of aluminum, and on it are scratched a handful of diagrams that, together, form a set of silent instructions. No words, not a single letter of any human alphabet, because a human alphabet would be useless to the finder. Just line drawings, meant to be figured out by anyone who understands physics, which is to say, by anyone capable of catching the spacecraft in the first place. Start with the most important idea on the whole cover, which is the idea of a clock. If you want to tell a stranger how fast to spin a record, you have a problem. How do you say this fast without using a single human unit? You cannot say spin it at this many turns per minute, because a minute is a human invention. And what is a minute to someone who did not grow up on Earth? Nothing at all. You need a unit of time that is built into the universe, a tick that any physicist anywhere would measure the same way. And there is one. It comes from the hydrogen atom, the simplest and most common atom there is. A hydrogen atom is a single proton with a single electron, and that electron can flip, in a sense, between 2 slightly different states, and when it does, it releases a tiny, precise pulse of radiation, always at the same frequency, always taking the same sliver of time. That flip is like the tick of the most reliable clock in existence, and it is the same clock everywhere in the cosmos. So on the cover, there is a little drawing of that hydrogen flip, and it quietly defines the unit of time that all the other numbers on the cover are measured in. It is the key that unlocks everything else. With that clock established, the rest of the instructions can be written in a simple binary code, just patterns of long and short marks that stand for numbers. There is a drawing of the record itself, with a stylus resting on it, showing exactly where to start. There is a number, written in that binary, telling the finder how long one rotation of the record should take, measured in ticks of the hydrogen clock. Work it out, and you get the correct playback speed, which happens to be 16 2/3 turns per minute, half the speed of an ordinary record. There are diagrams showing how the sound signal turns into a picture, so the finder can reconstruct the images we stored, as well as hear the sounds. And then there is the map. The same idea as the Pioneer plaque, but this is the one that always stops people, so it is worth slowing down for. It is a pattern of lines radiating out from a single point, like a burst, or a dandelion gone to seed. The point in the center is our sun, and each line points toward a pulsar. Now, what is a pulsar? A pulsar is the collapsed core of a dead star, an object so dense that a spoonful of it would weigh about as much as a mountain. It spins, sometimes hundreds of times a second, and it sends out a beam of radiation as it spins, so that from far away it appears to blink or pulse with astonishing regularity. Each pulsar has its own rhythm, its own precise blink rate, as individual as a fingerprint. And those rhythms change over time, but they change slowly and in a way that can be calculated. So here's the clever part. On the map, along each line pointing to a pulsar, the team wrote that pulsar's blink rate, in binary, in units of the hydrogen clock. A finder who catches the record could look at those blink rates and identify which specific pulsars they belong to. Then they could work backward. They could find the one point in the entire galaxy from which those particular pulsars would appear at those particular positions, with those particular rhythms. That point is here. That point is us. The map is a cosmic return address, written in the language of dead stars. And because pulsars slow down at known rates, the map does something else, almost as an afterthought. It functions as a date stamp. A finder could tell, from how much the pulsars had slowed since the rhythms recorded on the cover, roughly when the record was made. The map says both where we are and when we were. There is one more dating trick on the cover, and it is a small, strange, wonderful thing. In one corner, the team electroplated a tiny sample of a radioactive metal, uranium-238. Uranium-238 decays at a known, steady rate. Half of it turns into other elements over about 4.5 billion years. That is its half-life, and it is one of the most reliable slow clocks in nature. So a finder could measure how much of that uranium was left, compare it to how much should have been there at the start, and read off how much time had passed. The record carries its own age, ticking down atom by atom, a clock that will still be running long after every clock on Earth has stopped. Take a step back and look at what they did with that cover. With no words at all, using nothing but the shared machinery of the universe, they told a stranger everything. This is a recording. Here is how fast to play it. Here is how to turn it into pictures. Here is where we live, and here is when we sent it. It is one of the most elegant pieces of communication ever attempted. And the people who made it genuinely did not know if a single line of it would ever be read by anyone. So that is the outside, the instructions, the map, the clocks. Now let's go through the door and look at what is actually stored inside, on the record itself. And the first thing to understand is that a record like this can hold pictures as well as sound. The images were turned into a kind of audio signal, a set of tones that a finder could translate back into lines and dots on a screen. 115 images in all, chosen out of thousands, each one meant to carry a piece of what it is to live on this planet. The very first image is not a photograph at all. It is a plain white circle on a dark background, a calibration image. Its only job is to tell the finder, if you decode this correctly, you should see a clean circle. If your circle comes out as an oval or a smear, adjust your machine until it comes out round. It is a test pattern, a way of checking that the whole picture system is working before the real images begin. It is humble and clever, and the artist Jon Lomberg, who chose the images, always felt it was underrated. A simple circle, standing at the doorway of the whole collection, quietly saying, "Get this right first." After the circle, the images build up carefully, the way you might teach someone from the ground up. First come the tools of understanding. There are drawings that define numbers, so the finder learns how we count. There are the basic units we measure the world with. There are diagrams of the chemical elements and of the structure of DNA, the twisting ladder that carries the instructions for every living thing on Earth. The idea is to hand the finder a small toolkit before showing them anything complicated. Here is how we count. Here is our chemistry. Here is the molecule that makes us alive. Now you are ready to look at us. Then come the worlds. There is our sun. There is a chart of the solar system, showing the planets in order, so the finder can match it against the map on the cover and confirm which little world we are pointing at. There are photographs of Earth from space, that blue and white marble that had only recently been photographed for the first time. It is easy to forget how new those images were in the 1970s. For almost the entire history of our species, no one had ever seen the whole Earth at once. Then, suddenly, we could, and there it was on the record, our whole home in a single frame. From the planet, the images move inward, toward life. There are pictures of landscapes, deserts and forests and the sea. There are pictures of animals, an elephant, a crocodile, an eagle, a school of fish, insects on a flower. There are plants and trees and a single fallen leaf. It is a small natural history of Earth, compressed into a handful of frames, chosen to suggest the sheer variety of living things without pretending to be complete. No collection could be complete. They were not trying for complete. They were trying for a taste. And then the images turn to us, to people. And this is where the choices get delicate, and where you can feel the team wrestling with what to show and what to leave out. There are pictures of human anatomy, diagrams of the body and its systems, taken in part from an encyclopedia of the time. There is an image tracing conception and the development of a human being before birth, and there is a photograph of a mother nursing her child. The team wanted to show the finder not just what we look like standing still, but where we come from, how a person begins. It is tender material to send into the void, the beginning of a human life, laid out for a stranger who has never seen a human at all. There was, at one point, meant to be a photograph of a nude man and a nude pregnant woman, standing simply to show the human form plainly and honestly. And here the earlier trouble came back to bite them. NASA remembered the letters about the Pioneer plaque, the outrage over 2-line drawings, and decided it did not want that fight again. So the photograph was refused. In its place, the record carries a silhouette, an outline of a man and a pregnant woman, with a small diagram of the growing child inside. It tells you a great deal about the moment that a message meant for a mind on the far side of the galaxy still had to pass the modesty standards of a 1970s government agency. The stars would get an outline because a photograph was a step too far. Beyond that, the images open out into ordinary human life. And honestly, this is the warmest part of the collection. There are people eating, licking, drinking, tasting food, because the team wanted to show how we take in the world through our mouths, which is not obvious to a stranger. There are people running, and a group of children, and an old man with a younger woman and a child, 3 generations in one frame. There are portraits of faces from around the world, different ages, different peoples, a deliberate spread meant to say, we do not all look the same, and all of these are us. And there are the things we build. There is the Great Wall of China, seen from the ground. There is the Taj Mahal. There is the Sydney Opera House, its white sails still fairly new at the time. There is a modern city, and a house, and the inside of a home. There is a page from a book by Isaac Newton, the actual mathematics of how the planets move, sent back out toward the planets it describes. There is a violin resting beside a sheet of music, a quiet promise of the sounds to come later on the record. There is a factory, a telescope, an airport, a highway with cars on it. It is a portrait of a busy, building, tool-making species, proud of its structures, showing off a little, which is a very human thing to do. There are runners in a race, athletes straining forward to show a stranger how our bodies move at full effort. There is an astronaut floating free in space, tethered to nothing, a person who has left the planet entirely, which is a quietly astonishing thing to include. Look, the image says, we do not only live down here, we have already begun to leave. There is a picture of Earth rising over the surface of the moon, taken by people who traveled there. And there is that page of Isaac Newton's mathematics, the actual laws that let us understand how the Voyagers themselves would move, sent back out along the very paths they describe. The record contains, in a sense, the instructions for its own journey. The work of choosing all this fell mostly to Jon Lomberg, and it was not a matter of picking pretty pictures. Every image had a job. Some were there to teach the finder how to read the rest. Some were there to establish scale, a person next to a building, a hand next to an object, so a stranger could judge our size. Some were chosen because they carried information densely, a single frame that quietly explained many things at once. Lomberg thought about the order too, so that the images build on each other, each one preparing the finder for the next. It is a designed sequence, not a scrapbook. It starts with a circle and ends in its way, having tried to explain an entire species from the ground up. And there was a constant, impossible tension underneath the whole effort. 115 frames is nothing. It is a tiny window through which to show a planet of billions of people, thousands of cultures, millions of years of life. Whatever you leave in, you leave out 10,000 things just as worthy. Which continent gets shown and which does not? Whose face stands for a person and whose does not? Whose city, whose food, whose way of living? The team agonized over this, and they knew, even as they finished, that any answer would be incomplete and a little unfair. There is no fair way to compress a world into 100 pictures. There is only the attempt, made as honestly as a rushed team can make it. Now, here is what is not in the images, and this tells you as much as anything that is. There is no war. There are no weapons, no soldiers, no bombs, no ruins of cities we destroyed. There is no famine, no disease in its worst forms, no cruelty. There is no poverty, no crime, no image of one human being harming another. The team made a decision, and they made it consciously. This message would show the best of us, or at least the gentlest of us. It would show a species that eats and builds and raises its children and makes music, not a species that fights and starves and burns. You could argue about that decision, and people have. Is it honest to send a portrait of humanity that quietly leaves out half of what humanity does? Is it a lie of omission, a family photo with the difficult relatives cropped out? Or is it simply what anyone does when introducing themselves to a stranger, putting a good foot forward, hoping to be liked? The team leaned toward the second view. Druyan later said, more or less, that the record was aspirational. It showed not only who we are, but who we hope to be. It was a portrait of our better nature, sent out in the hope that our better nature is the part worth preserving. Whatever you make of that, the images are only half the picture in the most literal sense, because the record does not only show, it also sounds. And it is in the sounds and the voices and the music that the record stops being a document and starts being something closer to a living thing. So let's leave the pictures behind and listen. Let's start with the voices, with the greetings, with the many ways a planet learned to say hello. When the record begins to speak, it does not speak in one voice. It speaks in 55. Greetings, one after another, in 55 different human languages, a chorus of hellos from all over the earth. They open in a language almost no one alive can speak. The very first greeting is in Akkadian, a tongue that was spoken in the ancient cities of the Middle East something like 6,000 years ago, in the time of the first great civilizations, and has been dead for thousands of years. And the list closes in Wu, a modern Chinese dialect spoken by millions of people right now. So the greetings run, in a sense, across the whole span of human history, from a language of the first cities to a language of the living present. It is a small poem hidden in the running order. We have been talking for a very long time, it says, and we are talking still. In between those two ends are dozens more. There is a greeting in ancient Greek and one in Latin. There are greetings in the great languages spoken by hundreds of millions, and greetings in languages spoken by comparatively few. Arabic, Hindi, Russian, Spanish, Swahili, Korean, Welsh, and on and on. The words themselves are simple. Mostly they are what you would say to a guest or to a stranger you hope to befriend. Hello. Peace. We wish you well. May you be happy. One of them, roughly translated, says something like, "We are trying to reach you. Please come and visit if you are able." There is something almost unbearably hopeful in that. A voice, recorded on a summer afternoon, inviting a stranger it will never meet to please come visit, across a gulf that light itself takes tens of thousands of years to cross. The story of how those greetings were gathered is a small comedy of the kind that follows every rushed project. The original plan was tidy and official. The United Nations sits in New York, and it is full of delegates from all over the world, speaking every major language on the planet. So the idea was to have the delegates record the greetings. Clean, easy, diplomatic. In practice, it became a mess. The recordings ran into problems. Some delegates gave long political speeches when what was wanted was a simple hello. Coordination fell apart. The tidy plan collapsed the way tidy plans tend to. So the team fell back on something closer to home. Cornell University, where Sagan taught, has departments full of people who speak the languages of the world, professors and students and their families. And so the team simply went around the campus, knocking on office doors, asking whoever they could find, "Would you say a greeting into this microphone in your language for a record that is going to the stars?" And people did. That is why the greetings have the warmth they have. They are not the polished words of diplomats. They are the voices of ordinary people, teachers and their spouses and their kids, saying hello into a microphone in an office in upstate New York. Half of them were probably a little bemused by the whole thing. All of them are now sailing through interstellar space. One of those voices belongs to a child. The greeting in English was recorded by a 6-year-old boy named Nick Sagan, who was Carl's son. And what he says is this: "Hello from the children of planet Earth." Think about that for a moment. Of all the ways to say hello in English, all the formal phrases they could have chosen, they picked a small boy's voice, saying hello on behalf of the children. Not the presidents, not the scientists, the children. It is one of the gentlest choices on the whole record, and it was made almost casually because the boy was right there and his father was running the project. That child is an old man now, or nearly. His hello is still going, unchanged, at the same age forever, out past the edge of the solar system. Alongside the 55 spoken greetings, the record carries a few more formal messages. There is a spoken greeting in English from the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time, a man named Kurt Waldheim. He offers the good wishes of the peoples of the earth, and he expresses the hope that we might one day join a community of galactic civilizations. And there is a printed message, not spoken, but etched, from the President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. Carter's message is worth sitting with, because it is honest in a way official statements rarely are. He wrote that this was a present from a small, distant world, a token of our sounds, our science, our images, our music, our thoughts, and our feelings. He wrote that we were attempting to survive our time so that we might live into the finders. He acknowledged, plainly, that the message might never be read at all, that the odds were long, that the spacecraft would only be found if there were other spacefaring civilizations out there in the dark, and he chose to send it anyway. That is the whole spirit of the record in a few sentences. We probably will not be heard. We are speaking anyway. The speaking is the point. There is one more voice-like sound folded into the greetings, and it is not human. Woven in among the languages is the song of a humpback whale. The team included it deliberately, as if to say, these are not the only voices on this planet. Here is another mind, another kind of speaker, singing in the ocean. A stranger listening to the record would hear the human hellos, and then this long, strange, sweeping call, and might reasonably wonder which of these is the native of the planet, and which is the guest. It is a quietly humbling thing to have done. We introduced ourselves, and in the same breath we admitted we are not alone here, that we share this world with other singers. So that is the chorus of hellos. 55 human languages, from the first cities to the present day. A child speaking for the children, a president admitting the long odds, and a whale singing underneath it all. But hellos are only the beginning of what a place sounds like. A planet is not just its greetings. A planet has weather, and animals, and machines, and bodies, and all of it makes noise. So the team set out to record the sound of the earth itself, not what we say, but what we are. And that turned into one of the most extraordinary 12 minutes on the whole record. The Sounds of Earth section is a montage, about 12 minutes long, and it tries to do something almost impossible. It tries to tell you what a whole planet sounds like, in a little over the length of a couple of songs. And the way the team ordered it is like a story with no words. moving from the oldest sounds to the newest, from the planet itself all the way up to a single human heart. It begins before life. The first sounds are the sounds of a young Earth, or something like them. There is the deep rumble of volcanoes and the crack of an earthquake, the noises of a world still cooling and settling. There is thunder. There is the hiss and patter of rain and the roll of surf against a shore and wind moving over open ground. These are sounds that were here long before anything alive could hear them. A planet making its weather in an empty room. Then life arrives, quietly, the way it did in reality. There is the chirp of crickets and the call of frogs, the first voices of the living world. There are birds, many birds, because birdsong is one of the loveliest sounds any planet could hope to send. There is a hyena and an elephant and the call of a chimpanzee, our close cousin, whose voice sits somewhere unsettlingly between an animal and a person. The montage climbs the tree of life as it goes, from insects to our nearest relatives, and you can feel it approaching us. And then we arrive. There are footsteps and the sound of someone walking, a simple thing that tells a stranger we move on two legs across solid ground. There is the tapping of tools, the sound of a species that makes things. There is fire, crackling, the discovery that changed everything. There is the beep of Morse code, and if you know the code, the dots and dashes spell out a Latin phrase that means, roughly, through hardship to the stars. It is a motto about striving, about reaching upward through difficulty, tucked into the record as a small private joke for anyone clever enough to read it. The human sounds keep coming, and they get more intimate as they go. There is a train, and the sounds of ships, and a truck, and an airplane, the machines we built to move ourselves around. And then the montage does something tender. It turns away from the machines and toward the body. There is the sound of a kiss. There is a mother speaking softly to her baby, and the baby's small sounds in return. There is laughter, ordinary human laughter, and the laughter you hear, as it happens, is Carl Sagan's own. The man who built the record left his own laugh inside it, folded in among the sounds of Earth, sailing out toward the stars he spent his life thinking about. And then, at the very end, the montage narrows all the way down to one person, to the inside of a single human being. There is the beat of a human heart, and there is the sound of human brain waves, the faint electrical activity of a mind, turned into sound. The montage that began with the whole planet, with volcanoes and oceans, ends inside one body, at the quietest possible scale, listening to a heartbeat and a mind think. It is a journey from a world to a person in 12 minutes, and the person at the end of it is the smallest and the most important thing on the record. Those brain waves at the end are not just anyone's, and the story of whose they are and why they were recorded is the most human thing about the entire Golden Record. It is a love story, and it was pressed into the message almost by accident, and it is now the farthest traveled feeling in the history of our species. So, let's slow all the way down and tell it properly. The young writer running the creative side of the record was named Druyan. She was in her late 20s, bright and driven, and she had been thinking hard about the deepest question the project raised. Not what to put on the record exactly, but what it would even mean for a distant mind to understand us at all. And one day, she had an idea that almost anyone else would have dismissed as impossible, and that she decided to take completely seriously. Her idea was this: what if you could record a person's thoughts, not their words, but the actual electrical activity of a living brain, the raw signal underneath thinking? You cannot read those signals today. Nobody can turn a brainwave back into a thought. But the record was going to last 1 billion years, and it might be found by a civilization far older and far cleverer than ours. And who is to say what such a mind could do with a recording of a human brain in the act of thinking? Maybe, in 1 billion years, someone could learn to read it. It was a wild hope. But the whole record was a wild hope, so it fit right in. So the plan was made. Anne Druyan would go to a hospital and have her brain waves recorded, along with her heartbeat and other signals from her body, while she lay still and thought, deliberately, about certain things. She wrote herself a kind of mental itinerary, a route to walk her mind along during the recording. She would think about the history of the Earth, about how life had emerged and grown and diversified, about the rise of human civilizations, their triumphs and their troubles. She would try, in one session, to hold the whole human story in her head, so that if anyone ever did learn to read the signal, they would find a mind moving through everything that mattered. That was the plan. And then, a couple of days before the recording, life did what life does and rewrote the plan. Because during those intense weeks of building the record, working side by side, Anne Druyan and Carl Sagan had fallen in love. Not in a dramatic scene. It came over them slowly, in the middle of the work, until one day, on a phone call, they simply admitted it to each other. They decided, more or less on the spot, to spend their lives together. There was no long courtship, no careful build-up. There was a phone call and a shared understanding that everything had just changed. And it changed at the beginning of June, in 1977, just a couple of days before Anne Druyan was scheduled to lie down and have her brain recorded for the message to the stars. So when the day came, and she lay still, while the machines traced the activity of her heart and her mind, she followed her mental itinerary as planned. She thought about the Earth, and about life, and about the long human story. But she also, inevitably, thought about the thing that was newest and largest in her life. She thought about being in love. She thought about Carl. She let that feeling move through her, while the instruments recorded whatever a body does when it holds a feeling like that. And all of it, the history and the wonder and the love, went down together into the signal. That signal, an hour of it, was compressed down to about a minute and placed onto the record at the very end of the sounds of Earth, right after the human heartbeat. When you play it, it does not sound like thoughts. It sounds like a rapid crackle, a burst of static, almost like a string of tiny firecrackers. There is no way, listening to it, to hear the love in it. The love is not audible. It is not decodable, not by us, and maybe not by anyone, ever. And yet it is there. We know it is there because Anne Druyan told us, years later, what she was thinking in that room. She has said, plainly, that part of what was moving through her mind was the wonder of being in love, and of being newly, specifically, in love with the man she was about to marry. She has returned to that thought many times over the decades, that a private, tender, entirely human feeling felt by one young woman on one afternoon in New York is now sealed inside a gold record, farther from home than anything our species has ever made, and still going. Carl Sagan and Anne Druyan did marry, a few years later, and they stayed together for the rest of his life. They wrote books together, and made television together, and built a life around the shared conviction that the universe is worth paying attention to, and that wonder is not childish, but essential. He died in 1996. She has carried the work forward ever since, and through all of it, out beyond the planets, that one compressed minute keeps traveling. the electrical trace of a woman thinking about the history of the world and about the man she loved, moving silently through the dark at tens of thousands of miles an hour. There is something almost too large to hold in that. We send probes to measure magnetic fields and photograph moons, cold instruments doing cold work, and folded in among all that machinery, we also sent a feeling. Not a description of a feeling, not a poem about love, though there could have been one. We sent the actual physical signature of love, as it happened, inside a living body, on the assumption that a feeling might be worth preserving, even if no one can ever quite read it. It is the least scientific thing imaginable, and it was done by scientists in the middle of the most technical project of their lives, because they understood something that the instruments could not measure. That the part of us most worth sending is not the part you can put in a diagram. You could argue it is the truest thing on the whole record. The greetings are chosen words. The images are chosen pictures. The music is chosen art. All of them are, in a sense, curated, arranged, put on their best behavior. But the brain waves are just raw, a real body on a real day, holding real thoughts, unedited and uncensored and completely honest, because there was no way to fake it and no way to read it. Whatever was actually in Anne Druyan's mind that afternoon is exactly what went to the stars, and what was in her mind, by her own account, was the whole story of the earth and love. So the record carries a heartbeat, and behind the heartbeat, a mind in the act of loving. And that felt to the team like a natural bridge to the last and largest section of the whole message. Because there is one more way that human beings hold their feelings, one more way we take what is inside us and send it outward to be shared. We make music, and the largest single part of the Golden Record, 90 minutes of it, is given over to exactly that, to the music of a planet gathered from every corner of it and sent into the silence. The music was Timothy Ferris's domain more than anyone's, and he has said since that it was the hardest part of the whole record, because there is simply too much good music in the world. For every piece that made it onto the disc, there were 1,000 others just as worthy, left behind. 90 minutes is not very long when you are trying to hold the entire musical achievement of a species, so every choice had to carry weight. Every track had to earn its place by standing for something larger than itself. The team pulled in help, including a famous folklorist named Jon Lomberg, a man who had spent his life traveling the world with a recorder, capturing the music of ordinary people in fields and churches and front porches. Lomax pushed hard for the music of everyday people over the grand European tradition, and the record is better for that argument. Because the great insight of the music section is that it does not just send the polished concert music of the West, it sends the whole planet singing. A wedding song from Peru sits near a symphony by Beethoven. A girl's initiation song from Central Africa sits near a Bach concerto. The record refuses to rank them. It simply lays them side by side and says, all of this is us. Still, the European classical tradition is there, and it is there heavily, and one composer above all. If you had to name the musical soul of the Golden Record, it would be Johann Sebastian Bach. There are 3 separate pieces of Bach on the disc, more than any other composer, and there is a reason the team kept coming back to him. Bach's music has a quality that feels almost mathematical, a sense of deep order and structure, of patterns building on patterns, that a stranger who understood mathematics might just be able to appreciate even without ears like ours. One member of the team half joked that sending Bach would be boasting, showing off the very best we had. they sent him anyway. When you are introducing your species to the universe, a little boasting is forgivable. There is a bright, driving movement from one of Bach's Brandenburg concertos, all forward motion and interlocking lines. There is a solo violin piece and a prelude and fugue from the collection of keyboard music that composers have studied for centuries. Together, they show a mind, Bach's mind, building structures of sound as intricate as any cathedral, out of nothing but the relationships between notes. If there is a single argument on the record that human beings can think beautifully, it is Bach. Then there is Beethoven, and here the choices get emotional. There is the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, that famous four-note figure that almost everyone on earth would recognize, the sound of fate knocking, of struggle set to music. But the deeper Beethoven choice is quieter and comes later on the disc. It is a slow movement from one of his very last string quartets, written when he was old and completely deaf. Music of extraordinary tenderness and acceptance. It is the sound of a man who could no longer hear a single note, pouring out some of the most moving music ever written. That the record carries both the young Beethoven, all fists and fire, and the old Beethoven, all peace and letting go, is one of its quiet triumphs. It sends not just our music, but the whole arc of a human life inside it. There is Mozart, of course, a piece from his opera, The Magic Flute, a soaring, almost impossibly difficult passage for a high soprano voice, the kind of singing that makes people gasp in a concert hall. It is there partly to show what a trained human voice can do, how high and how fast and how precisely we can sing when we push the instrument of the body to its limit. And there is Stravinsky, a section from his Rite of Spring, music that caused an actual riot when it was first performed, jagged and pounding and strange, included to show that our music is not all order and sweetness, that we also make sounds that are wild and difficult and new, that we do not only soothe ourselves, we also unsettle ourselves on purpose and call it art. So the classical core of the record runs from the deep order of Bach to the tenderness of the late Beethoven to the shock of Stravinsky. It is a serious, considered argument that human beings can build beauty out of sound. But it is only half the story. Because the team knew, and Alan Lomax insisted, that the concert hall is not where most of the music on Earth actually lives. Most music is not performed by orchestras in grand rooms. It is sung in kitchens and at weddings and around fires, by people who never called themselves musicians at all. And so the other half of the record goes looking for exactly that. The world music on the Golden Record is a kind of quiet miracle, because it took real effort to gather in an age before you could summon any song on earth with a tap. The team had to hunt through archives and reels and private collections to find recordings that were good enough and free enough to send. And what they found is astonishing in its range. There is a piece of gamelan music from the island of Java in Indonesia, the shimmering bell-like sound of an orchestra of tuned metal, unlike anything in the Western tradition. There is percussion from Senegal, drums answering drums. There is a raga from India, a long meandering vocal performance by a great singer named Kesarbai Kirkar, the kind of music that unfolds slowly and takes its time, that does not resolve in the tidy way Western ears expect. There is a piece for a Chinese instrument called the guqin, a 7-stringed zither, and the piece is called Flowing Streams, a meditation on water and sound, played by a master named Guan Pinghu. That one, in particular, many people consider the most beautiful thing on the record. It sounds like patience itself. There is more. There are panpipes and drums from Peru. There is the deep, buzzing drone and voice of Aboriginal Australian song, some of the oldest continuous musical tradition on the planet. There is a men's chorus from Georgia, in the Caucasus, singing in the dense, close harmony that region is famous for, a song about a folk hero. There is a haunting solo from Bulgaria, a woman's voice, sharp and ornamented and utterly unlike a Western pop voice, singing a song about a rebel in the mountains. There is a Navajo night chant from North America. There is a girl's initiation song from a rainforest people in Central Africa. There are panpipes from the Solomon Islands. There is a mariachi piece from Mexico, and a bagpipe, and a wedding song. A stranger listening straight through would hear the sheer, dizzying variety of it, the way this one small planet found 1,000 different ways to organize sound into meaning. There is jazz on the record too, warm and human. There is a piece by Louis Armstrong, that unmistakable trumpet and voice, the sound of a music born out of hardship and turned into joy. There is a lively Mexican piece full of strings and bright rhythm, the kind of song played at celebrations, chosen partly because it is simply impossible to feel sad while it is playing. The team thought about that. They did not want to send only the grand and the solemn. They wanted the finder to know that we also make music just to dance, just to feel good, just to be together in a room, and that this everyday joy is as much a part of us as any symphony. And the running order was chosen with care, though few people notice it. The pieces are arranged so that the record breathes, moving between the fast and the slow, the loud and the quiet, the ancient and the new, never sitting too long in one mood. It rises and falls like a good evening of listening. Whoever, or whatever, ever plays it from beginning to end, if anyone ever does, will be taken on a deliberate journey through the feelings of a species and set down gently at the other end. It is a mixtape, in the truest sense, made with the same loving attention anyone gives to a mixtape meant for someone they care about. It just happens to be a mixtape for the whole universe. And then, tucked in among the ragas and the choruses and the concertos, there is rock and roll. There is a song by Chuck Berry called Johnny B. Good from the 1950s, all electric guitar and driving rhythm, and a story about a country boy who could play a guitar just like ringing a bell. Its inclusion caused some argument at the time. Was rock and roll really serious enough to represent the planet? Serious enough to sit next to Bach and Beethoven? Anne Druyan fought for it and won, and she was right. Because Johnny B. Good is joy, pure and physical, the sound of young people wanting to move, and a portrait of humanity without that would be a portrait with something essential missing. There is a well-known joke about it. Someone imagined the reply we might one day get from the stars, a short message that simply read, "Send more Chuck Berry." It is a joke, but it is a kind one. It says that of everything on the record, the rock and roll might be the part a stranger could love most easily. The single most quietly devastating choice, though, comes at the very end of the music. The record closes on a piece by an American musician named Blind Willie Johnson, a blind street preacher and blues singer who recorded in the 1920s and died poor of illness after his house burned down and he had nowhere else to go. The piece is called "Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground." It has almost no words. It is mostly a man humming and moaning over a slide guitar, and it is one of the loneliest, most aching sounds ever recorded. The team chose it to close the entire message. So the last music a stranger would hear, after all the symphonies and the ragas and the rock and roll, is the sound of one poor, blind, forgotten man expressing a loneliness so deep it needs no language. There is a terrible fitness to that. A record sent into the loneliest place imaginable, ending on the sound of human loneliness itself, sailing out into a dark that is, in fact, very cold, and very much the ground of nothing at all. And there is one piece of music that is not on the record, and its absence is its own small story. The team wanted to include a Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun, written by George Harrison, a bright and hopeful piece about winter ending and warmth returning. The idea of sending a song literally about the return of the sun out toward other suns was too good to pass up. The Beatles themselves, by most accounts, were happy for it to go. But the Beatles did not own the rights to their own recordings. A record company did. And the company said no. They wanted money the tiny project could not possibly pay, and they would not budge. So the song that should have been on the record, the one about the sun coming, never made it aboard. It is one of the stranger footnotes in the history of the record that humanity's message to the cosmos was shaped, in a small way, by a copyright dispute. The stars will not hear Here Comes the Sun. A lawyer saw to that. So that is the music. 90 minutes, 27 pieces, from Bach's cathedrals of sound to a blind preacher's moan, from a Chinese meditation on flowing water to a country boy playing guitar, just like ringing a bell. It is the largest and most generous part of the whole record, and maybe the truest. Because music is the one language on the disc that a stranger might actually feel, even without understanding a word of it, even without ears at all, if only they could sense the patterns underneath. With the music chosen and the images gathered and the voices recorded, and one young woman's brain waves folded in among the sounds, the record was, at last, nearly done. But it still had to be built, physically, and the last stretch of that work was its own quiet ordeal. It is easy, telling the story this way, to make it sound smooth. It was not smooth. It was a scramble, all the way to the end. The team was choosing the eternal contents of a message to the cosmos, while also fighting with tape machines and record plants and the ordinary stubbornness of 1970s technology. Every sound had to be transferred cleanly. Every image had to be converted into the right pattern of tones, tested and checked, because a single error cut into the master would sail out to the stars uncorrected and stay wrong forever. There was no fixing it later. There was no later. Once the record left, it left exactly as it was. So the final days had a particular kind of pressure to them, not the pressure of a normal deadline where a mistake means embarrassment or a late night. The pressure of permanence. Whatever they got wrong for 1 billion years. Whatever they left out for the entire remaining history of the object, which is to say, essentially, forever. You can hear people who were in the room describe how strange that felt, to be arguing about the order of 2 songs at 2 a.m, exhausted, and to remember, suddenly, that this order would outlast the pyramids, that the choice you made while barely awake would still be the choice long after everyone you loved was gone. And they made those choices anyway, tired and rushed and human, which is the only way anything real ever gets made. There was no perfect version. There was only the version they could finish in time. Timothy Ferris has said, more or less, that the record is not a statement of what humanity is at its best in some final, polished sense. It is a snapshot of what a particular small group of people, working flat out, in a particular few months, could manage to gather and agree on. That is not a flaw in it. That is the most honest thing about it. It is not a monument handed down by a committee of the ages. It is a rushed, loving, imperfect human effort, and it wears its humanity openly, which may be exactly why it moves people. When it was finally done, the master was used to press the actual records, cut into copper and plated in that thin, incorruptible layer of gold. 2 identical copies, one for each spacecraft. Each was sealed into its aluminum case with the cover diagrams and the little sample of uranium, and the stylus tucked inside, ready for a hand that would almost certainly never reach for it. And then, in a clean room in Florida, someone bolted each record to the side of each probe, and the work was over. The message was closed. Whatever humanity had to say to the universe on that occasion had been said and sealed, and there was nothing left to do but launch it. So the record was, at last, finished. Now it had to leave. In the late summer of 1977, the 2 Voyager probes stood on their rockets in Florida. Each had a golden record bolted to its side, sealed in its aluminum case. The instructions and the map and the little sample of uranium all faced out toward whatever might one day find them. Voyager 2 went up first on the 20th of August. Voyager 1 followed on the 5th of September. The planets were aligned, the window was open, and the message, whatever it was worth, was on its way. The records were, at that point, almost an afterthought to the mission. The real job of the Voyagers was to study the outer planets, and over the next 12 years, they did that better than anyone had dared to hope. They flew past Jupiter and sent back the first detailed views of its storms, including the Great Red Spot, a hurricane larger than the Earth that has been blowing for centuries. They discovered that Jupiter has thin rings, which no one had known. They found volcanoes erupting on one of Jupiter's moons, the first active volcanoes ever seen anywhere but Earth. They found a moon that might hide an ocean beneath its ice. They flew onto Saturn and saw its rings up close, thousands of them, delicate and complicated in ways no telescope on Earth could show. Voyager 2 kept going, all alone, out to Uranus and then to Neptune, worlds no spacecraft had ever visited and none has visited since. It found a moon of Neptune with geysers of nitrogen erupting into space, in a place so cold it seems impossible anything should be moving at all. Every planet it passed, it saw for the first time in human history. The Voyagers turned 4 distant points of light into real places, with weather and moons and rings and surprises. And then the planets ran out. Past Neptune, there was nothing left to fly by, only the long emptiness. The cameras were, in time, switched off to save power, and the 2 probes settled into the job they will do for the rest of their existence, which is simply to leave, and to keep leaving, further and further, forever. There is a boundary out there, far beyond the planets, that is worth understanding, because crossing it is the moment the Voyagers truly became interstellar. Our sun does not just give off light, it gives off a constant wind of particles, a thin breeze of charged matter streaming outward in every direction. That wind blows a huge bubble around the entire solar system, pushing back against the thin gas that fills the space between the stars. The edge of that bubble, where the sun's wind finally gives out and the wind of the galaxy takes over, is a real border. On one side, you are still inside the sun's domain. On the other side, you are in the space between the stars, truly out, truly interstellar. Voyager 1 crossed that border in the year 2012. Voyager 2 crossed it a few years later, in 2018, at a different spot. They are the first 2 objects humans have ever built to leave the sun's bubble and enter the wider galaxy. And they told us the moment they did it, in a way that is oddly beautiful. One of the instruments still working on the probes can sense the vibrations in the thin gas around it and turn them into something we can hear. When Voyager 1 crossed into interstellar space, the pitch of that hum changed because the gas out there is denser than the gas inside the bubble. Scientists could listen to the sound rise and know that the spacecraft had passed through the wall, a rising tone from the edge of the solar system, the sound of a machine leaving home for the last time. So the Golden Records are now, both of them, out in true interstellar space. They have done the one thing they were built to do, which was to leave. Everything the mission was designed for, the planets and the photographs, is finished and behind them. What remains is the part that has no end. The two records are simply falling outward now, through the dark between the stars, carrying their music and their voices and their 1 minute of a mind in love, toward destinations so far away that the numbers stop meaning much. But it is worth trying to feel those numbers anyway, because they are the whole reason the question of who this was for even matters. So let's follow the records out, as far as they are going. Right now, as you lie here, Voyager 1 is more than 15 billion miles from the Earth. That number is so large, it slides right off the mind. So let's try to make it a little more real. Light, the fastest thing there is, takes about 8 minutes to travel from the sun to your face on a summer afternoon. That same light takes more than a full day to reach Voyager 1. When engineers send the probe a command, they wait most of a day for it to arrive, and most of another day for the answer to come back. The spacecraft is so far away that a conversation with it takes longer than a conversation across most of human history ever needed to. And it is moving fast by any human standard. Something like 35,000 miles an hour, fast enough to cross the United States in a few minutes. But space is so vast that this blistering speed barely counts as motion at all. At that pace, it still takes the probe tens of thousands of years to get anywhere near another star. The distances between stars are not like the distances between planets. They are larger by a factor that has no comparison in ordinary life. If the sun were the size of a grain of sand, the nearest other star would be miles away, with nothing but empty room in between. That is the ocean the records are crossing. Mostly, it is nothing at all. So where are they going? The honest answer is that they are not aimed at anything. Neither probe was launched toward a particular star, because the point was to leave, not to arrive. They are simply falling in whatever direction the planets flung them. But if you run their paths forward, far into the future, they do eventually drift near other stars, by chance more than by design. In about 40,000 years, Voyager 1 will pass within roughly 1.5 light years of a small, dim star in the northern sky, a red dwarf named Gliese 445. It will not stop there. It will not enter that star system. It will just pass, at a distance still far larger than the whole width of our solar system, and keep going. Around the same time, 40,000 years or so from now, Voyager 2 will drift within a couple of light years of another modest star called Ross 248. Again, not a visit, a passing in the dark, at a distance that in human terms is still unimaginably vast. 40,000 years. Try to hold that. 40,000 years ago, there were still other kinds of humans sharing the earth with us. The great cave paintings had barely begun. Writing would not be invented for tens of thousands of years more. Everything you would call history, every city and empire and language and song, has happened in a stretch of time far shorter than the wait between the record's launch and its first quiet pass near another star. The record is not on a human timescale. It is on a cosmic one. It was never really built for the near future. It was built for deep time. And here is the part that the team understood and made their peace with from the very beginning. The odds that anyone will ever find it are almost unimaginably small. Space is overwhelmingly empty. The probes are tiny and dark and silent, and they are not headed for any particular door. For the record to be found, there would need to be another spacefaring civilization out there, and it would need to happen upon this small object in the enormous dark, by chance, across the vast reaches of both space and time. The people who made the record knew all of this. They were not naive. They ran the numbers, and the numbers said, in effect, that in all likelihood, no one will ever play it. Which raises the obvious question, the one that has been sitting quietly under this whole story from the start. If they knew, almost for certain, that no alien would ever find it, then why did they build it at all? Why spend those frantic months and that tiny budget and all that care, choosing the perfect Bach and the perfect greeting and folding a woman's brainwaves into the dark for a listener who, by their own honest reckoning, was never going to come? What is the point of a message that will almost certainly never be read? The answer to that question is the real heart of the Golden Record, and it turns out the record was never really made for the aliens at all. Carl Sagan said it about as plainly as it can be said. He described the record as a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean, and he pointed out that a spacecraft would only ever be found and the record only ever played if there were advanced civilizations out there in the space between the stars. But the act of launching that bottle, he said, told you something very hopeful about life on this planet, regardless of whether anyone ever pulled it from the water. Read that carefully. The value of the message, in his own words, was not in its being received. The value was in its being sent. Because think about what it takes to build a thing like the Golden Record. To build it, you have to believe, or at least hope, that your species is worth introducing. You have to sit down and decide what the best of humanity even is. You have to choose the music that makes you proudest, the images that move you most, the voices that feel most like home. You have to look at your whole species, all its history and all its variety, and ask, what would we want a stranger to know about us? And the moment you ask that question seriously, something happens to you. You start to see yourselves from the outside. You start to see the earth as one place, and everyone on it as one people, which is a very hard thing to see from the inside. Remember when this was made? The 1970s. The world was split down the middle by the Cold War, two great powers pointing enough weapons at each other to end civilization several times over. It was an era when it was very easy to see humanity as divided, as tribal, as a collection of enemies. And in the middle of all that, a small team sat down and built a portrait of humanity as a single thing. One planet, one people in all their variety. A species that makes music and raises children and reaches for the stars. The record does not have an American side and a Soviet side. It does not take sides at all. It quietly insists that underneath all our divisions, there is one human family. And this is what that family sounds like. That is the first sense in which the record was made for us, and not for them. It was a mirror. To build a self-portrait for aliens, you have to first assemble the self, and assembling the self, seeing ourselves whole, was the real gift. The aliens were, in a way, an excuse, a distant, imaginary audience that gave us permission to do something we badly needed to do, which was to look at our own species with tenderness and decide it was worth saving. And there is a second sense, deeper than the first. The record was made for the future, not the alien future, our future. Because a message built to last 1 billion years is, whatever else it is, a time capsule. And the finder of a time capsule does not have to be a stranger. It can be your own descendants. It can be us, later. The record carries a version of Earth as it was in 1977, sealed and safe and unchanging, in a way nothing on Earth itself can be. Everything down here erodes. Buildings fall, recordings decay, languages die, memories fade. But out there, in the deep cold, the record does not change. The greetings do not age. Nick Sagan's small voice will say hello from the children of planet Earth at exactly the same pitch, forever. Anne Druyan's minute of love will keep its shape when every person who ever knew her is gone. The record is the most durable thing our species has ever made, and what it preserves is not a fact or a formula, but a feeling, a snapshot of who we hoped we were, kept perfectly, longer than the pyramids, longer than the continents in their current shapes, quite possibly longer than the Earth itself, because that is the strangest fact of all, and the team knew it. In roughly 5 billion years, our sun will swell into a red giant and likely swallow the inner planets, Earth almost certainly among them. Everything here will be gone. Every book, every building, every grave, every trace that we ever existed at all, burned away or buried under a dying star. But the golden record, out in interstellar space, cold and untouched, will very probably still be there. It will very probably outlast the planet that made it. So it is entirely possible that one day, a very long time from now, the only evidence that human beings ever lived will be 2 gold records, drifting in the dark, the only proof that this whole story happened. And what they carry is a child's hello, and a woman's heartbeat, and 90 minutes of the music of a world that no longer exists. That is who it was made for, not the aliens, who will almost surely never come. It was made for us, to help us see ourselves, and it was made for time itself, to carry a piece of us past the end of everything, on the faint, stubborn, deeply human hope that being remembered matters, even if there is no one left to do the remembering. And something happened down here that the team never quite planned for, which proves the point better than any argument could. The record found its real audience on Earth. Over the years since 1977, the contents of the Golden Record have been released to the public again and again. You can hear the whole thing now. You can listen to the greetings and the whale song and Guan Pinghu playing Flowing Streams and Blind Willie Johnson's Aching Close, all of it, without leaving your bed. The record made for a stranger 1 billion years away turned out to move people most powerfully right here, right now, on the very planet it depicts. It has been pressed onto vinyl for collectors, so people can own a copy of humanity's message to the cosmos and play it in their living rooms. Its images and its story have filled books and films. And a few years ago, the original master recordings, the actual tapes the team assembled in 1977, were sold at a famous auction house for a small fortune, treated as one of the great cultural artifacts of the 20th century. Which, of course, they are. The thing that was supposed to introduce us to aliens instead reintroduced us to ourselves. Every time a person on Earth listens to it and feels that catch in the throat, that mixture of pride and smallness and tenderness, the record is doing exactly what it was really built to do. It just does it here, for us, instead of out there, for them. The people who made it were changed by it too. You cannot spend months deciding what is best about being human without it working on you. Druyan has spent the decades since returning, over and over, to what the record means, keeping Carl Sagan's way of seeing the world alive after he was gone, and Sagan himself carried the lesson of the record forward into one more famous moment that belongs, really, to the same story. In 1990, when Voyager 1 was already far out past the planets, Sagan convinced NASA to do something that had no scientific value at all. He asked them to turn the spacecraft's camera around, one last time, and point it back the way it had come, back toward home. And Voyager 1 took a photograph of the Earth from billions of miles away. In that photograph, the entire planet, everything and everyone we have ever known, is less than a single pixel, a tiny, pale dot hanging in a beam of scattered sunlight. Everyone you love, every person who ever lived, every war and every song and every golden record, all of it on that one small dot that you could hide behind a fingertip held up to the sky. Sagan wrote about that image in words people still return to when they need to feel the right size. He pointed out that everything that ever happened in human history happened there, on that mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam, that every triumph and every cruelty, every saint and every tyrant lived out their lives on the same tiny stage, and that the picture ought to teach us kindness and humility and a sense of responsibility for the only home we have ever known. It is the same lesson as the record, seen from the other direction. The record asks, what is best about us, worth sending into forever? The pale dot answers, whatever it is, it all fits on a point of light, so be gentle with it and with each other. That is really the whole of it. 2 spacecraft, launched to study the planets, that quietly became something more, a gold record on each one, carved with the sounds and pictures of a world, sealed against 1 billion years of dark, aimed at no one in particular. A map made of dead stars pointing back to a small blue planet, a child's hello, a whale's song, Bach and Chuck Berry, and a blind preacher's moan. And folded in among the sounds of Earth, 1 compressed minute of a young woman's brain, thinking about the history of everything and about being in love. All of it sent out on the slimmest of hopes that it might be found and built in truth, so that we might understand what we were sending, so that we might see ourselves whole for once and decide we were worth the trouble. So the record keeps going. Nobody is watching it. Nobody needs to. It is out there right now, past the edge of the sun's reach, in the true dark between the stars, carrying its small cargo of everything we hoped we were, and it will keep going long after this night, and after all our nights, which brings us gently all the way back down, back through the vast dark, back past the planets, back toward the small warm world it came from, back, in the end, to you, lying here in the quiet, as the whole enormous story folds itself back down to the size of a single room. So let's come back down slowly, the way the record went out, only in reverse. Start far out, where Voyager 1 is now, in the true dark, more than 15 billion miles away, where the sun is just one more star among thousands and gives no warmth at all. There is no sound out there, no wind, no weather, nothing but the record, falling. It is not lonely exactly, because loneliness needs someone to feel it, and there is no one out there to feel anything. It is just quiet, the quietest place there is, and through that quiet, the small gold disc keeps its steady course in no hurry, because it has all the time in the world, and then some. Come inward, past the far reaches, back toward the light, until the sun grows from a point into a disk again, and the planets appear, strung out along their orbits. Neptune, blue and cold, Saturn with its rings, Jupiter with its long, slow storm, the same worlds Voyager visited on its way out, all those years ago, still turning, still keeping their ancient appointments around the sun, indifferent and beautiful. The record passed all of these once, going the other way. Tonight, we are just visiting them in the mind, on the way home. Come inward again, past the asteroids, past Mars with its rust-colored deserts, until you reach a small blue and white world, third from the sun, wrapped in a thin skin of air. That is the planet on the record. That is the pale dot in the photograph. And it is also, of course, the actual ground beneath you right now, the real Earth, turning quietly through the night while you lie on it. Everything the record tried to capture, every greeting and every song and every heartbeat, came from here, from this one small world, from people not so different from you. Come down through the atmosphere, through the layer of air that keeps us all alive, thinner than the skin on an apple when you see it from space. Down through whatever weather is over you tonight, the clouds or the clear dark, the same kinds of clouds and dark that made the thunder and the rain the team recorded all those years ago, down toward the surface, toward your own part of the world, wherever that is, toward your town, your street, the roof over your head, toward this room. And now you are here, back where you started, in the dark, in your own bed, at the small, warm human scale, where the whole enormous story actually began. The record is still out there. It does not need you to watch it, and you do not need to hold on to any of it anymore. So let yourself settle now, here, in this room. Feel the weight of your body against the mattress, the simple fact of being held up by something solid. Feel where your head rests. Feel your shoulders letting go of the day, one at a time, sinking a little further into the dark. There is nothing left to do tonight. There is nowhere you need to be. The story is told, and you are allowed to stop holding it. Notice your breathing, without changing it. Just let it be slow and easy, the way it wants to be when you finally give it permission. In and out. The same air that made the wind on the record, the same air that carried every voice on it, moving gently in and out of you now. You do not have to think about it. Your body has been doing it your whole life, without any help from you, the way the record keeps traveling, without any help from anyone. Some things just carry on. Let this be one of them. And here is something quiet to rest against as you drift. That heartbeat on the record, the human heart the team placed near the end of the sounds of Earth, is beating in you right now. Yours, steady and patient and entirely reliable, keeping its slow time in the dark of your chest without ever being asked. The very thing they chose to send to the stars, because it is the simplest sign of a living person, is happening inside you at this exact moment. You are carrying the same sound they thought was worth sending across the galaxy. You have been, all along. And those brain waves, the compressed minute of a mind at work, thinking about the history of everything, and about love. A mind is doing that in you too, right now, softly, as you fall asleep. Your thoughts, drifting and loosening, are the same kind of electrical whisper they tried to preserve forever. Whatever you are half thinking as you sink down toward sleep, some stray image, some warmth, some ordinary tenderness, it is made of the very stuff they believed was worth immortalizing. You do not have to do anything with it. Just let it move through you, and let it go. The atoms you are made of came from stars, the same as everyone on that record, the same as everyone who ever lived. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the oxygen you are breathing in and out right now, all of it was forged in the hearts of stars that lived and died long before the Earth was here. You are, quite literally, made of the same ancient material as the light in the sky. So when the record sails past those distant stars in 40,000 years, it is, in a way, going home, back to the kind of place we all came from. And so, in the smallest way, are you, every time you look up. You belong to that story. You always have. You do not have to remember any of this. That is the gift of it. You do not have to keep a single name, or a single number, or a single fact. Not Sagan, not Druyan, not the pulsar map, not the uranium clock, none of it. If it is all gone by morning, that is completely fine. The record does not need you to remember it. It does not need anything from you at all. It will keep doing what it does, whether or not you ever think of it again, and that is exactly why you can let it go so easily now. It will all still be out there in the morning. When you wake, whenever you wake, Voyager 1 will be a little farther out than it is right now, a few 100,000 miles further into the dark, still carrying its music and its voices and its 1 minute of love. It will not have missed you. It does not know you are here. It asks nothing of you but to exist on the same small world it came from, which you are already doing, simply by lying here and breathing. You have already done everything the story needs from you. You showed up, and you listened, and now you can rest. Think, if it helps you drift, of how quiet it is out there where the record is. No sound, no rush, no deadline, not anymore. Just the slow, patient falling through the dark, going nowhere in particular, in no hurry to arrive. There is a deep peace in that, if you let there be. The most distant object we have ever made is not straining, not struggling, not afraid. It is simply carried along, the way you are being carried now, down and down into sleep. You can let yourself be as unhurried as the record. You can let yourself simply drift. Everything on it was chosen with love, by tired people who cared, in a rush, on a small budget, for a listener who would probably never come. And it turned out the love was the point, not the listener. The care was the point. The reaching outward was the point. You have felt a little of that reaching tonight, that old human wish to be known, to leave a mark, to say into the dark, we were here, and we were worth knowing. It is one of the tenderest things about being a person, and you can set it down now. It has been carried this far. It does not need you to carry it any further tonight. So let the far things be far. Let Voyager fall through its endless quiet. Let the planets keep turning. Let the record keep its child's hello, and its whale's song, and its blind man's moan, safe in the cold, unchanged, for 1 billion years. None of it needs your attention. None of it needs your worry. It is all taken care of, out there in the dark, better than anything down here can ever be taken care of. You can hand it all over to the night, and come the rest of the way back to yourself now, to the warm dark of this room, to the weight of the blankets, to the slow rise and fall of your own breath, to the steady, faithful beating of your own heart, the very sound they thought was worth sending to the stars. You have it right here. You are it, right here. The whole message, the greeting and the music, and the mind in love is just a way of pointing at the ordinary miracle of a living person, breathing, in the dark, at the end of a long day. That is you. That has always been you. There is nothing more to understand. There is nothing more to reach for. The record is out there, and you are in here, and both of you are exactly where you are meant to be. It, falling through the stars. You, sinking into sleep. Two quiet things, made of the same old starlight, at rest in the same wide universe, each carrying on without needing anything from the other. So let it settle. Let the whole long story settle over you like a blanket and grow soft and dim and far away. Let the names blur. Let the numbers dissolve. Let the last of your thoughts loosen and drift, the way the record drifts, gently, into the dark. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing to hold. There is only your breath, slow and easy, and the quiet and the warm weight of you here in the dark. So just rest now. The stars will keep. The record will keep. It will all still be out there in the morning. So just breathe and let go and sleep.